Over 3,000 years ago, a sprawling, hyper-connected network of empires controlling millions of lives vanished almost overnight in what we now call the Bronze Age collapse. The great palatial centers of the ancient world were suddenly reduced to ash, their written languages forgotten, and their lucrative international trade routes severed forever. For over a century, historians blindly blamed an unstoppable confederation of maritime warriors for this destruction, labeling them simply as the mystery invaders. But what if the boastful inscriptions carved into ancient Egyptian temples have been masking a far more terrifying reality? A systemic environmental failure that serves as a chilling blueprint for our modern world? To understand the sheer magnitude of this civilizational deletion, we must first dive deep into the legend that shaped our modern historical understanding. The traditional narrative of the Late Bronze Age ends in fire, blood, and the wailing of conquered peoples. If you were to walk through the monumental mortuary temple of Ramesses III at Medinet Habu in Egypt, you would be confronted by towering stone reliefs depicting a desperate, apocalyptic struggle for survival. These intricately carved walls show the disciplined Egyptian forces clashing with a chaotic, overwhelming armada of foreigners. These are the infamous Sea Peoples, groups definitively identified in Egyptian epigraphy as the Peliset, the Cheker, the Shekelesh, the Shurden, and the Luka. According to the boastful inscriptions of the pharaoh, these warriors swept down from the north and the sea, laying waste to everything in their path. The mighty Hittite Empire, which controlled the vast expanse of Anatolia and Syria, annihilated. The Mycenaean palatial centers in Greece, the legendary homes of Agamemnon and Odysseus, burned to the ground. The unimaginably wealthy mercantile hub of Ugarit on the Levantine coast, wiped off the map in a firestorm so intense it literally baked the kingdom's final desperate clay letters into permanent stone. The legend, propagated by early Egyptologists like Gaston Maspero, who first coined the term peuple de la mer in 1881, tells us that these mystery invaders were an unstoppable juggernaut. They were viewed as a dark, barbaric wave of piracy and conquest that reset human progress by centuries. For generations of archaeologists, this was the accepted historical gospel. The great civilized empires grew decadent and weak, and barbarian hordes from the sea arrived to deliver the fatal blow. The visual evidence at Medinet Habu is undeniably striking. We see enemy ships capsizing in the Nile Delta, fierce warriors with distinctive horned helmets or feathered headdresses falling to Egyptian arrows, and chaos dominating the battlefield. But if you look closer at these ancient reliefs, moving past the martial glory of the pharaoh, a glaring anomaly emerges. The carvings clearly depict ox-drawn carts heavily laden with possessions, carrying women and children right alongside the warriors. That seemingly minor detail is the first massive crack in the traditional legend. Armies of conquest, intent on piracy and domination, do not bring their families in slow-moving, cumbersome wooden carts into the vanguard of a naval invasion. This was not a calculated military campaign of expansion. This was a desperate, panicked migration of an entire displaced population seeking salvation. The danger that truly stalked the Eastern Mediterranean was not a fleet of foreign ships, but the very nature of the hyper-advanced civilization they had painstakingly built. The Late Bronze Age was a period of unprecedented, intricate globalism. Professor Eric H. Klein, a leading authority on the era, famously refers to this period as being defined by hypercoherence. The empires of the Egyptians, the Hittites, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and the Mycenaeans were not isolated, self-sufficient fortresses. They were deeply integrated nodes in a highly complex, fragile international supply chain. To understand the systemic danger, you must understand the technological lifeblood of the era: bronze. Bronze is a specialized alloy, typically consisting of 90% copper and 10% tin. Copper was relatively abundant, primarily mined and smelted in the island kingdom of Al-Ashia, which we know today as Cyprus. Tin, however, was the ancient world's equivalent of crude oil, incredibly rare, highly prized, and entirely localized, to forge the weapons, armor, tools, and luxury goods that maintain the military and economic power of these empires. Tin had to be imported from specialized mines as far away as the Badakhshan region of modern-day Afghanistan. To put the sheer scale of this reliance into perspective, consider the Hittite military machine. At the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE, the Hittite Empire fielded an army of nearly 50,000 infantrymen and over 3,000 heavy, three-man chariots. Every single chariot linchpin, armor scale, sword, and spearhead required that exact 10-to-1 metallurgical ratio to avoid shattering on the battlefield. Imagine a massive, continuous trade route stretching thousands of miles, relying on overland donkey caravans, precarious maritime shipping, and complex diplomatic treaties between rival kings. If just one critical node in this network failed, the entire geopolitical system would shatter. The discovery of the Uluburun shipwreck off the coast of Turkey provides a perfect microcosm of this lost globalism. The sunken vessel contained 10 tons of Cypriot copper oxide ingots and exactly 1 ton of pure tin, the precise ratio needed for weapon-grade bronze. It also carried Canaanite jars filled with rare terebinth resins, ebony from Africa, and Baltic amber from Northern Europe. The kings of these interconnected empires referred to each other as brother in their diplomatic correspondence. The famous Amarna letters, not out of genuine affection, but out of a desperate, calculated need to maintain the uninterrupted flow of these vital goods. In one specific Amarna letter, designated EA35, the king of Elashia writes to the pharaoh of Egypt, apologizing for a small shipment of copper and explaining that a plague had struck his land, killing his copper miners. The entire international economy teetered on these localized vulnerabilities. How resilient do you think our modern, digitized global supply chains are compared to these ancient maritime trade routes? If a single localized disruption can crash our global economy today, imagine the terror of the ancient world when their only supply of tin simply ceased to exist. When the copper stopped flowing from the ports of Cyprus, or the tin routes from the mountainous east were severed by local unrest, the great palatial foundries went cold. The transition into the Iron Age is often completely misunderstood as a moment of sudden, triumphant technological genius. In reality, iron was an inferior, harder to work, and highly corrosive fallback material. It was adopted strictly out of desperation because the international supply chain that produced superior, rust-proof bronze had completely evaporated. Are we looking at a collapse driven primarily by natural climate disasters or by human violence and the severing of trade? Type climate in the comments if you believe the environment was the ultimate executioner of the Bronze Age, or type war if you think human conflict and the breaking of the supply chains was the primary cause. Your engagement helps us uncover what history truly values and guides our future research. The science behind this collapse permanently removes the guesswork from history and paints a terrifying picture of a world suffering from a fatal, multi-system organ failure. The mystery invaders were not the disease. They were merely a symptom. Modern dendrochronology, the highly precise study of tree rings, has revolutionized our understanding of this era. In a groundbreaking study published in the prestigious journal Nature, researchers analyzed 3,200-year-old juniper timbers, specifically Juniperus excelsa, excavated from the Midas Mound tumulus at Gordion, located in the absolute heartland of the ancient Hittite Empire in central Anatolia. By analyzing the microscopic cell structures and measuring the carbon-12 to carbon-13 stable isotope ratios within unusually narrow tree rings, scientists can perfectly map moisture availability and climate stress. The data revealed a terrifying, undeniable truth. A severe, continuous, and absolute drought struck the region precisely between 1198 and 1196 BCE. One single year of drought is a manageable tragedy for a complex society armed with vast grain silos. 3 consecutive years of absolute drought in a semi-arid region means total, irreversible agricultural failure. It means the soil turns to blowing dust, the vital rivers run dry, and millions of people face agonizing starvation. The Hittite Empire simply starved to death from within. This micro-level tree ring data perfectly aligns with the macroscopic archaeological evidence found at Hattusa, the heavily fortified Hittite capital. Archaeologists have discovered that the city was not simply stormed, its massive postern gates were abandoned, and the city was systematically emptied before being partially burned and left to the ashes right around 1200 BCE. The empire didn't fall to foreign swords, it fell to the climate. But the science reveals the climate crisis was not just a localized Anatolian problem. We now have irrefutable proof of a regional environmental catastrophe thanks to the pioneering palynological research of Dr. Daphne Langut and Professor Israel Finkelstein at Tel Aviv University. To understand the ancient climate of the Levant, these researchers undertook a massive operation. Drilling through 1,000 feet of water and over 65 feet of lakebed sediment in the center of the Sea of Galilee. This allowed them to extract core samples covering 9 millennia of ecological history. By analyzing fossilized pollen grains, the virtually indestructible organic fingerprints of ancient plant life, at incredibly precise 40-year intervals, they mapped the exact depth of the regional ecosystem. The data showed a sudden, vertical drop in traditional Mediterranean flora. The lush forests of mighty oaks, pines, and carobs vanished. The highly cultivated olive trees, the backbone of the ancient agricultural economy, plummeted. Almost overnight, this fertile vegetation was replaced by Chenopodiaceae, semi-arid, hot desert scrub. Radiocarbon dating of these specific sediment layers confirms that this megadrought persisted not for a few difficult years, but for nearly 3 grueling centuries, preventing any immediate societal recovery. To compound the environmental nightmare, hard geological data indicates the Mediterranean was simultaneously experiencing an earthquake storm. Seismologists have identified a devastating 50-year window where major seismic events systematically unzipped along the tectonic fault lines of Greece, Turkey, and the Levant. This relentless tectonic stress transfer, where one earthquake triggers the next along a fault system over decades, leveled palatial centers like Mycenae and Tiryns, destroying critical infrastructure faster than the starving populations could ever rebuild it. Add to this catastrophic mix the massive eruption of Mount Hekla in Iceland around 1159 BCE, throwing millions of tons of sulfur into the upper atmosphere and causing a documented decade of global cooling that further crippled already failing agricultural yields in the Near East. Here at Ancient Chronicles HD, our mission is to resurrect these forgotten truths, stripping away centuries of myth to look directly beneath the surface of history's greatest mysteries. We meticulously decode the failures of the past so we can better understand the incredibly fragile systems of our present. If you want to continue uncovering the suppressed, hard data narratives of human history, ensure you are subscribed and journey with us into the next chronicle. The forbidden truth of the Bronze Age collapse, the reality long obscured by the boastful propaganda of Egyptian pharaohs, is that the terrifying sea peoples were actually victims. The overlapping epigraphic and modern genetic data now clearly shows that the Shurden, the Luca, the Shekelesh, and the Peliset were not alien marauders from the edge of the world. They were the displaced populations of Anatolia, the Aegean, and the Mediterranean islands. They were driven into the sea by the very climate catastrophes, megadroughts, and earthquakes we just explored. They were confederations of climate refugees who had watched their crops wither, their livestock perish, and their magnificent palatial cities crumble into ruin. Recent groundbreaking DNA sequencing from burials in Ashkelon, a major coastal city of the Philistines, who are historically identified as the Peliset faction of the Sea Peoples, shows a sudden, massive influx of European and Aegean genetics arriving in the Levant exactly at the time of the Bronze Age collapse. They were migrating southward, heavily armed but desperate, moving towards Egypt because the mighty Nile River, fed by deep African monsoon sources untouched by the Mediterranean drought, was the only reliable agricultural engine left in a starving world. They fought the armies of Ramesses III out of a desperate primal need to secure fertile land to feed their dying children. The frantic letters baked into the clay of Ugarit during its final, fiery destruction capture the immense heartbreak and terror of this forbidden truth. The recently translated House of Urtenu archives in Ugarit paint a harrowing picture of a society being squeezed to death. As the drought set in across Anatolia, the Hittite overlords demanded massive grain tributes, known in Akkadian as manahatu, from their vassals to feed their own starving capital. Letters from Hittite officials began flooding into Ugarit, and polite diplomatic requests turned into desperate, aggressive demands. The Akkadian word biru, meaning hunger, suddenly begins dominating the international correspondence. By forcing Ugarit to export its dwindling grain reserves, the Hittite Empire effectively sentenced its own wealthiest merchant hub to starvation. Amurapi, the final king of Ugarit, wrote a desperate, pleading letter to the king of Cyprus, stating, "My father, behold, the enemy's ships came, my cities were burned, and they did evil things in my country. Does not my father know that all my troops and chariots are in the Hittite country, and all my ships are in the land of Lycia? Thus, the country is abandoned to itself." Another recovered tablet records a desperate plea to the king of Ugarit from an inland ally. "When your messenger arrived, the army was humiliated and the city was sacked. Our food in the threshing floors was burnt, and the vineyards were also destroyed. Our city is sacked. May you know it. May you know it." The help they begged for never came. The hyper-coherent, globalized system had completely broken down. The great merchant fleets were gone, the professional armies were starving, and the ancient world was burning. The Late Bronze Age died of systemic environmental shock. The mystery invaders were just the final, desperate gasp of a dying world, washing up in battered ships and creaking wooden carts on the shores of the only empire left standing. They deleted a civilization because there was simply nothing left of their own world to save. The Late Bronze Age wasn't the last time the Earth swallowed an empire whole. Click the video on your screen to uncover our next hard data investigation into the ancient world. Stay curious,